The biggest question in this war may no longer be only what happens on the battlefield. It may be who holds power in Tehran, how long that power lasts, and whether the people now shaping events are moving toward escalation or some kind of hard-edged negotiation. That is why one of the most revealing lines in the latest reporting was not a missile launch, not a military map, and not another strike update. It was President Trump saying he was not happy with Iran's new supreme leader. On its face, that can sound like just another sharp political comment. But in a crisis this deep, words like that matter because they send signals about recognition, legitimacy, pressure, and whether the White House sees the new leadership as someone to deal with or someone to isolate immediately. To understand why this matters, start with the central development itself. Multiple reports now say Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of Iran's late supreme leader Ali Khamenei, has been named as Iran's new supreme leader. CBS reported Iranian state media said he had been named. AP reported that Iran named the hardline cleric to succeed his father and described him as only the third supreme leader in the history of the Islamic Republic. That alone would make this one of the most consequential leadership changes in the region in decades. But it is happening in the middle of an expanding war, with Iranian, Israeli, American, and regional actors all trying to shape the next phase before the political situation settles. Mojtaba Khamenei is not entering this moment as an unknown figure, but he is also not a typical public politician. CBS described him as someone who has never held elected office and who has operated largely behind the scenes, especially from within his father's office, building influence across the security establishment and particularly within the Revolutionary Guard. CBS also noted that he studied theology in Qom and fought as a volunteer during the Iran-Iraq War when he was younger. AP went further, describing him as secretive, hardline, and closely tied to the Revolutionary Guard. So when people hear new supreme leader, they should not imagine a fresh face arriving with a clean slate. The reporting points more toward continuity, hardening, and a tighter fusion between political authority and the security establishment. That is part of why Trump's remarks matter. CBS reported earlier in the week that Trump said he must have a role in choosing Iran's next leader, and called the son of the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei unacceptable. CBS also reported he called Mojtaba a lightweight. Another CBS report said Trump signaled willingness to speak with Iran's new leadership even as strikes continued. And the latest reporting adds his phrase that he is not happy with Mojtaba's elevation. Put those comments together and the picture becomes clearer. The White House is not treating this succession as an internal Iranian matter alone. It is signaling that who leads Iran is now being discussed as part of the war itself. That does not mean Washington can dictate the outcome, but it does mean the succession fight is being pulled into the center of the conflict. There is another layer here that matters just as much. AP reported that political figures within Iran criticized the idea of handing over the supreme leader's title based on heredity, comparing it to the monarchy overthrown in 1979, but that the Assembly of Experts apparently voted for continuity. That is a striking detail because the Islamic Republic has always presented itself as anti-monarchical and revolutionary. If the leadership is now consolidating around the son of the previous supreme leader during wartime, that choice may stabilize the top of the system in the short term, but it can also intensify criticism that the leadership is closing ranks rather than opening space. In other words, Mojtaba's rise may provide continuity for the state, but it also risks feeding arguments that the system is becoming more dynastic, more security-driven, and less politically flexible. That leads directly to the Israeli side of the story. One of the most sensitive reported developments in the past several days is that Israel has not treated a successor as off-limits. AP reported that Israel had already described Mojtaba Khamenei as a potential target. Al Jazeera separately reported that Israel's defense minister said the next leader would be a target for assassination. Whether one frames that as deterrence, pressure, or threat, the message is unmistakable. Succession does not create immunity. So now the new supreme leader enters office under wartime conditions while facing open hostility, not just toward Iran's military assets, but toward the person sitting at the apex of the system. That is not a normal transition. That is a succession under direct fire. Once you put those pieces together, the title of this story starts to make more sense. Trump saying he is not happy with Iran's new supreme leader is not just a reaction line. It lands in a context where he had already said Mojtaba was unacceptable, where he had said the United States should be involved in choosing Iran's next leader, and where Israel has reportedly threatened any successor who continues hostile policies. So this is no longer only about whether one man has replaced another. It is about whether Iran's new leadership is being boxed in before it can even define its own posture. And that creates a very dangerous dynamic because a leader under external pressure often has two broad choices: signal flexibility quickly or show resolve early so that he is not seen as weak at home. The reporting so far points more toward the second path than the first. AP's reporting supports that reading. It said the appointment marked a new sign of defiance by Iran's leadership and suggested Tehran was not close to giving up on what it sees as a fight for the system's survival. AP also reported that Mojtaba is seen as even more hardline than his late father and will now have final authority over Iran's armed forces and decisions about the nuclear program. Those are not small details. In Iran's system, the supreme leader is not just symbolic. The office holds the final say on major state matters, especially war, peace, and the nuclear file. So if a more hardline figure has taken control in the middle of war while being openly rejected by the US president and threatened by Israel, then the chances of rapid de-escalation become harder to imagine, not easier. That is an inference, but it is a grounded one based on the structure of Iran's system and the tone of the reported statements. At the same time, it is important not to overstate certainty, because the battlefield and the diplomatic picture are both still moving. CBS reported Trump said he was willing to speak with the new leadership in Iran. That means the door to contact is not publicly closed, even while rhetoric remains sharp. AP reported that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the United States was well on our way to its objective of eliminating Iran's ballistic missile stockpile and its ability to produce and launch missiles, while AP also noted that the administration has offered shifting rationales and timelines since the conflict began. Those mixed signals matter. They suggest that Washington is trying to combine coercion with room for tactical maneuver. But from Tehran's perspective, being told that the U.S. wants influence over who leads the country while strikes continue may not look like an opening. It may look like regime pressure under another name. This is where the regional picture becomes crucial. The leadership question is not happening in a vacuum. AP reported that Brent crude surged to nearly $120 a barrel before retreating, and that world markets dropped sharply. AP also said attacks in and around the Strait of Hormuz had all but stopped tankers from using the shipping lane, through which about a fifth of the world's oil is carried. The Al Jazeera live coverage you provided also described Gulf leaders emphasizing de-escalation and diplomatic solutions, and a reported wider regional anxiety, including Turkish concerns about missile spillover and continued attacks in Lebanon. That means the succession issue inside Iran is now tied directly to energy markets, regional security, shipping routes, and pressure from neighboring governments that want this conflict contained before it becomes a broader economic shock. And that gives Trump's words a second meaning. On one level, saying he is not happy with Mojtaba Khamenei is a political judgment about the person. On another level, it is a statement about the direction of the Iranian state. Trump and his team appear to be signaling that continuity at the top in Tehran is not something they regard as stabilizing. In fact, the phrase can be read as the opposite, that the emergence of a harder-line successor makes the conflict harder to resolve on terms Washington would accept. If that is the view in Washington, then the question becomes whether the administration will respond by escalating pressure further or by using the transition moment to test whether the new leader wants some kind of bargain. The answer is not yet clear from the reporting. There's also an internal Iranian audience for all of this. When a new supreme leader is installed after the killing of the previous one, the state has to project continuity, authority, and command. That means Mojtaba Khamenei cannot appear to take office under foreign approval or under foreign instructions. AP reported that President Masoud Pezeshkian welcomed the choice, and top Iranian officials praised the Assembly of Experts for convening under bombardment. Those gestures matter because they are meant to tell the country that the state is still functioning and the chain of authority remains intact. If that is the message Tehran wants to send, then Trump's public rejection of the new leader is unlikely to weaken him domestically in any simple way. It may instead strengthen arguments inside Iran that the country must close ranks. At the same time, that does not mean Mojtaba enters office from a position of total strength. The reporting points to a system under extraordinary strain. AP reported that Iran's key nuclear sites were in tatters after the June war, even though it still retained highly enriched uranium. AP also described ongoing U.S. and Israeli bombardment and widening regional anger as energy infrastructure was hit. The war has already imposed heavy costs on Iran and the surrounding region. So the new leader is inheriting not just authority, but a crisis portfolio: war management, deterrence, credibility, internal legitimacy, and the long-running nuclear question all at once. Any leader taking power in those conditions would face hard choices. A leader described as more hardline may face even fewer easy exits. This is also why the rhetoric around a successor matters more than it usually would. In many systems, a leadership change opens at least a small possibility of recalibration. But here, the language coming from outside powers has done almost the opposite. CBS reported Trump earlier framed Mojtaba as unacceptable. AP reported Israel had already identified him as a potential target. Al Jazeera reported Israel's defense minister explicitly threatened the next leader. Those are not the signals of actors waiting to see whether a new leader moderates policy. They are the signals of actors trying to shape the environment around him before he can consolidate power. That can be effective as pressure, but it can also harden the very outcome they want to avoid if the targeted side concludes that compromise will simply invite more demands. So what should viewers watch now? First, watch whether the new leadership speaks mainly in the language of continuity or in the language of redefinition. If Mojtaba Khamenei is presented simply as the guardian of his father's line, that suggests the state is prioritizing stability and resolve over experimentation. Second, watch whether Washington's language shifts from personal rejection to issue-based demands. There's a major difference between saying a leader is unacceptable and saying specific behaviors are unacceptable. Third, watch Israel's messaging closely. Public threats against a successor can serve as deterrence, but they can also raise the risk of direct leadership targeting becoming part of the conflict's next stage. And fourth, watch regional diplomacy, especially from Gulf states and countries like Turkey, because those governments have the strongest immediate incentives to stop the conflict from expanding. There's another reason to watch the regional players. The Al Jazeera reporting you provided described Qatar and Germany emphasizing diplomatic solutions, Turkey publicly discussing missile interceptions and the need to keep itself away from the conflict, and wider concern across the Gulf about escalation. AP also reported that Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Iraq were all dealing with direct or indirect security consequences, while the United States ordered non-essential personnel and families of staff to leave Saudi Arabia. That tells you this is no longer a story only about Washington, Tehran, and Jerusalem. The surrounding states now have immediate economic and domestic reasons to press for de-escalation, and that pressure could become more important if energy disruption worsens. Even so, diplomacy may not arrive quickly, because all sides are trying to avoid looking weak at the worst possible moment. Trump has publicly challenged the acceptability of Iran's new leader. Iran has installed a new supreme leader during wartime, and appears to be presenting that as a statement of continuity and defiance. Israel has signaled that succession does not change the target map. None of those moves naturally create a soft landing. They create a contest over legitimacy and leverage. The most optimistic case is that all of this is coercive positioning ahead of negotiations. The darker case is that each side is building a narrative that makes compromise harder because compromise would look like retreat. At the moment, the reporting supports caution on both possibilities rather than certainty on either one. If there is one point that should not be missed, it is this. Leadership transitions in Iran are never just ceremonial, and this one is especially consequential because it comes under wartime pressure amid direct foreign threats, and with a nuclear question still unresolved. AP reported that the supreme leader has the final say over all major policies, including war, peace, and the disputed nuclear program. So the emergence of Mojtaba Khamenei does not merely answer the question of succession. It creates a new decision-maker at the center of every major strategic file in the region. Whether he turns out to be rigid, tactical, or both, will affect not just Iran's next moves, but the calculations of Israel, the United States, Gulf monarchies, and global energy markets. That is why Trump's phrase, brief as it was, carries more weight than it might seem. Not happy sounds casual. In reality, it is part of a broader set of U.S. signals that the White House does not view the succession as an acceptable reset. Combined with earlier remarks calling Mojtaba unacceptable and lightweight, it suggests the administration sees his appointment as a warning sign, not an opening. But the problem with that approach is that Iran's system may interpret those signals not as pressure to moderate, but as proof that the war is now aimed at the political order itself. And once a conflict becomes, in the eyes of the leadership, a struggle over regime survival, de-escalation often gets harder because every concession looks existential. That is not a prediction of what must happen next. It is the core risk the reporting now points toward. So the real story here is bigger than a headline about Trump's reaction. Iran has a new supreme leader. The U.S. president has signaled rejection rather than endorsement. Israel has warned that a successor would not be immune from attack. Regional states are pushing for diplomacy while bracing for the costs of escalation. Markets are already reacting. And the person now stepping into Iran's highest office is widely described in reporting as more hardline, more closely linked to the security establishment, more likely to embody continuity than compromise. That combination does not tell us exactly what happens next. But it tells us why the next few statements, the next diplomatic moves, and the next military decisions matter so much. In wars like this, leadership transitions can either open a door or close one. Right now, the evidence suggests the door is still there, but it is getting narrower.